right, well, thank you very much. So this session is the last session, so this is what stands between us. Oh, one more thing, and cocktails, so let's keep that in mind. This session is about changing modes of international cooperation, public and private viewpoints, so taking a little broader view from the NGOs and from government institutions. And we have three presenters today. They are Dr. Jorge Guimarães, who we heard from yesterday, who is the president of CAPES. We have Dennis Misne, who is the director of the Fundação Lemann. And we have Joan Dawson, who is the executive director of the International Fellowships Fund and has been with the Ford Foundation. So I'm going to ask each speaker to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have Professor Altbach here, who will comment for 5 minutes, and then we'll hopefully have some time for discussion. So Dr. Jorge, if you would please come up. I will keep track of the time.
Thank you very much, Mary. I thank you again, the organizers. Now there are 5 universities, not 3 anymore, isn't it? So I guess what was missing, this very interesting discussion during the day today and yesterday night, is something that was missing. And this slide may call attention for something. Brazil was discovered by sailors, Portuguese sailors in the 1500s. However, for the 3 first centuries, nothing happened there. Nothing at all, except for, for exploiting our richness, gold, sugar cane, Brazil wood, and precious stones, coffee, and so on. And this also attracts some foreign invasions, which during very little. But for the first cultural institution was the Botanic Garden in Rio de Janeiro, so 1808. And that's the age of the Banco do Brasil. So, and this was when the royal family, Portuguese royal, came to Brazil in 1808, thanks to Napoleon. Okay, so when the first university created in Brazil, University of São Paulo, was 1934, 300 years after Harvard. So if you think about that, it's what we have today is a very young country in terms of culture and on the implementation of the increase the quality of science, the interaction, the cultural aspect of the interaction between university and private companies. It all is linked to this. Some other aspects on science and technology. Until the World War II, Brazil had a very small number of scientists and little institutional base for research. So this is 60-some years ago. Industry was very incipient, and mostly in traditional sector. Still today, many aspects is this. That's the fact. The federal agencies for supporting science and technology and so on, CNPq, CAPES, FINEP, and FAPESP were created much later than that. But even so, when in 1951, when CNPq and CAPES were created, there were only 5 universities in Brazil. So most of our universities are younger than CAPES or CNPq. Include some good ones like Unicamp, for instance, which I think is one of the best today. Graduate program starts in the middle 60s, and from this point on, the federal agents plus the state-oriented agents at that time, only FAPESP, they start strongly supporting the institutional basis for science. Concerning universities, high school, high education institutions, as today, that's the number, more 24,400 institutions. From that, 11%, 11.7% Republic, 99 federal, 108 states, 71 county institute. So most of them are here on private, few ones in philanthropic. So we must think about that, because as one can say that basic education and also most recently higher education attracts commercial institutions for very bad quality. For instance, if you look at this side, these are the 10 biggest one on undergraduate. And that this side is the 10 biggest one in the graduate system. You see that only 2 public universities belong to these 2 tables. And here, there is no private one at all. So this also helps to understand what we have been discussed the whole day today. So, and this accounts for 46% of the graduates enrolled. While here, only 14% is enrolled as undergraduate students, which means that most of them are also in the other institutions, private institutions that I showed before. The federal government has been improving the federal university. This was by 2002, 43 institutions in 43 cities. Today, we have 59 federal universities in 230 cities, covering much better the whole country. And concerning technical education, see what it is today. What's the green one is the new ones, the new technical schools, which started in the last 6 years. So this is the effort to respond most of the questions that was raised this morning. Concerning the graduating system, today you have been receiving 60,000 new students per year. As year 2011, one is missing. We have 180 enrolled students, 2/3 a master or professional master, and 1/3 at PhD levels. CAP supports 72,000 fellowships inside the country for PhDs, for masters, and postdoc, which is a new program in Brazil, the postdoc program. CAPS evaluate everything concerning the postgraduate program. So it means that though the university they have autonomy, they cannot create a course, a graduate course, without passing through CAPS. And this is evaluated every 30 years. All the data are collected every year, at the end of every year, and they pass to some qualifications and to some analysis by the committees, and then they will be, they will get a grade from 1 to 7. The whole program covers almost everything, every field, being little for engineer, as you see, 11% is engineers. And what about the result of this evaluation? That's for the last exercise. This was for the 3 years before that, 2010. It's only 11.8% get the 2 highest grades, 6 and 7, which is designed for those who have an international standard. And grades 1 and 2 are not represented here because they are out. They cannot continue to receive new students, to enroll new students. So can be in the best Brazilian universities. No doubt they must close their course. That's the budget of CAPS, what has been growing since 2003. We've gone together for $2 billion at our agencies. 77% is designed for fellowships. And we have some program for grants. This white one is our virtual library. We do not believe as much on open access because it's very expensive, much more expensive than this. We support that for the whole country. 30,000 journals, international journals, 140 database, and it covers 311 institutions. It costs us 5.8% of our budget, which means in this year $80 million for covering a whole system. 3 million people are getting access to this international information. And you see, the evaluation is quite cheap, and the administration is quite slow, too. The scholarship covers all fields. Again, engineer is behind for several reasons. That was asking this morning, why the engineer are going to be professors? The engineers are we're going to be professors. No longer. There is no candidate as much for graduate program. Why that? Because there is a high demand for graduated, at the undergraduate level, professional level engineers. So this will change. The next study is going to show that. Okay. So international cooperation, I'm going to go a little bit further. Most of our students, they are in the European countries, not in the United States. Why that? Because we have a lot of formal agreements with France, with Germany, Sweden, Holland, and many other countries. What we have here is individual cooperation. That's what you saw this event. Many examples, good, very good examples, but you know, that's very much individual cooperation. So we have joint research project to all these countries, university partnership, several countries, with that's the scholarship for including this. And this is a very interesting model. This is only for manufacturing engineer between 12 Brazilian and 10 German universities, plus 30 research institutes, including Fraunhofer. So it means that this is the kind of cooperation that I was expecting to see here today, with respect to be at the end of this meeting. With the United States, as CAPES is concerning, we have been CAPES FIPS that I said yesterday that is finished this year, for not by our fault, but from lack of financing from the American side, a CAPES Fulbright, and some U.S. universities. And we have new agreements with NIH, with another one with Fulbright, and the National Science Foundation. But these are new ones. They are not being exploited, have not been exploited as much so far. So this is how the students are discovered. Everything we said here concerning CAPES is inside of this. So that's what, and a few universities are involved besides. That's the percentage of the different fields. Okay, so we have this new program, called Science Without Borders, a special program for international mobility in science, technology, and innovation. And it has as objectives to strengthen advance in science, technology, innovation, and industrial competitivity through the expansion of international mobility, to expand the presence of Brazilian students and research institutions of excellence throughout the world, to strengthen the internationalization of Brazilian universities, to make stronger the knowledge-based innovative efforts of Brazilian industry, and finally, but not less important, to attract young talents and highly qualified research to work in Brazilian institutions, as Carlos Brito said that FAPESP is also doing. These are the fields that are covered by this, the science without the border. You see no human science, no social science, by the decision of our president. She's from this field, as you know. She's an economist. And she said that she knows why. And then you can see here that it's very well focused on technological side of our necessity cooperation. Brazil is doing well on science, growing fivefold faster than the rest of the world. We passed many very important countries. We are getting close to the most important one. This is difference for German in 1981, and today it's about threefold. Even to the United States, it was 83-fold in 1981, and today it's 11-fold, the difference in Brazil to the United States. And some fields are doing much better than that. And the pattern of Brazilian science is not very much different from what you see here. Brazil is second in this list, and when I say it is the last one, you see for natural science, the blue lines, for medical science, I mean, for engineer, the black or a little bit, I can't decide very much about this color here, but anyway. Then it's medical science in blue, and biological science is in green, and social science in yellow. Except for that, the differences are not so big. So you have been improving very much our leadership in many aspects. When CAPS was created, Brazil used to buy food and got for free from USAID. USAID, you say that? USAID? USAID. Milk. So, for free. So today, it's completely different from that. And this was the effort of the university. And bunker automation is the best in the world. National elections. We cannot talk about 1988, that is still counting. In Florida, who got that result so far. Industrial plants, aircrafts, metal mechanic, metallurgical industry, tropical disease. Dentistry, one of the best in the world is today, not only in science, but quality and services. Biofuels, petroleum, biological control of insects and other products. Cellulose production, paper industry. I'm finished. And this was done together with the universities. Petroleum, several institutions. Embraer, Embrapa. Also, another word, the universities are not too bad. Some that were in that table that you saw, but they help in the country. So I have a lot of challenge that I will not have time to go through them, but this is summarize what you have. Some weakness, large inequalities, economic, social, educational, poor child education in science, and low innovation in many industrial sectors. I pass all of this. It shows other aspects of this challenge. One of these is the number of scientists for the million of population. You see that you are way below the world average. This was shown before, how the distribution of 47 innovation, 1.2% of GDP for research, development, and innovation, which is quite little, and lack of innovation in industry, increased dependence on commodities exports, little patents I was discussing before, and most of the universities are making more patents than the industry in Brazil. In conclusion, the investment in higher education, science, and technology have brought considerable gains to the country. However, a huge challenge remains: sustain the progress in science, provide technology transfer and innovation, sustainable, environmental-friendly development, improve primary and secondary education, improve income distribution. Perspectives, that's why we're here for that, to see how we can discuss that. I expect that Tom can have some answer for this. And finally, for those who can, like Fernando Sabino is a good Mineiro, we know that it's necessary to learn. We are just begin, and you must continue. You will never finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. The next presenter is Denise Misne from the Fundação Lemann. So I'm going to ask Denise to come up, please.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Tom Trebat and all the partners from Columbia, Illinois, and Harvard here that organized this first Lemann Dialogue. I've became executive director of the Lemann Foundation only in the beginning of this year, in February, and I'm very happy to be having the pleasure to witness the first Lemann Dialogue here at Columbia yesterday and today. And as we get to the end of this debate here, it gets even more clear why this kind of conversation and this kind of event is so important. And it's also very I think, very impressive, and it shows the importance of those three centers, the presence of the Brazilian government representatives here at such a high level, and their commitment to the debate and everything they brought to the table. So very happy to be here. What the program, or that means Tom, asked me to say here today was talk about the evolving nature of private philanthropy in education in Brazil. And I think, I mean, it totally goes with Professor Werner Baer's comments in the end of the session, and I think last session. And I think one of the main things that we have to think about in this area is education is such a complex and difficult problem, and we're looking at some aspects of it only here today. And everyone has limited resources, even governments. And if you imagine from the foundation's part of it and from the private investment in this area, this is very limited, therefore needs to be very strategically thought of to be able to really make a difference, or at least contribute somehow to this debate. And if we look at the philanthropic sector in Brazil, the private social investment in Brazil, a lot of people, I mean 80 to be exact, 82% of all private foundations in Brazil, that goes for family foundations and company foundations, invest in education. And that has been a trend that is there probably at least in the last 10 years. And although all these, more than 80% of this very more and more rich country with very, very big companies and rich individuals invest in this, the total amount of money invested is really very almost insignificant. If you look at any state budget in this area, the city of São Paulo alone invests tens of billions of reais in the educational system. If we look at the private, the federal government, we're talking about a huge investment in this area. So these foundations should be thinking and need to be thinking very clearly about where they can make the biggest difference. And although this is part of the debate right now, if we look in the past 10 years, this was not very much on the table. A lot of the private investment in this area was basically trying to substitute what the state was doing or what was supposed to do. Is the quality of basic education is not very well in the country, so I'm going to build one school. I'm going to be one preschool or a daycare center with some educational worries or programs. I'm going to fund very specific initiatives that would be much more fulfilling in terms of an individual fulfillment of seeing that you're doing something good than really contributing to change at the policy level. And Fortunately, I think that has evolved a lot. And on the debates between foundations in working in education in Brazil, you see more and more the debate around policy issues and how to affect public policy. But then again, I mean, just knowing that you need to affect policy doesn't mean that you know the answers. And I think, but this is very particular to the educational field, not only it's a very complex area, but I think although we have made some progress, and we saw this, and I'm again focusing on basic education in the beginning, although we're seeing progress. Brazil was the third country who has most evolved in the PISA and all that, but if you look at the real numbers, it's really, really striking. I mean, the quality of our basic education is really lacking in almost every level. I mean, 87% of people who graduate from high school don't know basic math, and that won't create PhD scientists, that won't develop innovation. Reading illiteracy in the country is still very, very high in terms of really comprehending what you're reading. And so we have a ton of challenges related to education, and we don't really have lots of success stories. I mean, in some other areas in Brazil, we had a lot of development in the past years because we really found out how to solve or how to at least tackle some of our most complex issues, and really were able, with government investment and in partnership with the private sector and NGOs, to be able to scale up. We're seeing this. I come from the field of public safety. I've worked 12 years in the area of public safety. We're seeing this in Rio right now. We saw São Paulo got an 80% decrease in homicide. That didn't start from one day to the other. It were decades of investment, finding the solution, implementing in scale. Rio is doing the same thing. Pernambuco is going through a very good program. If we look at the AIDS program or many other health areas, we found solutions. In education, I think we're still, in basic education, we're still doing this. And I think that's where the role of foundations can be very important in analyzing exactly, being risk takers, not needing to innovate all the time. Sometimes being risk takers mean betting in some solutions for longer term than other people, other sectors of society are able to do, researching and having access to what's best in terms of the debate all over the world, to be able to draw on that to develop programs that can help a solution in Brazil. If we look at the Brazilian problem, it's not only finding demonstration projects that can be successful, but really things that policies that can affect millions of students at the same time. And I think if we go from to the Lemann Foundation specifically, to share with you what we are doing, although here we've talked a lot about the investment of the Lemann family and the Lemann Foundation on higher education and internationally, the majority of the effort of the foundation has been in the past 10 years in improving the quality of basic education in Brazil. The reason for that is very basic, is if we really believe, and we do very strongly believe, that education is a major source of development for the country and inclusion and guarantee of rights, we have to look at the base of the pyramid and make sure that everyone has access to an excellent education. And in order to do this, basically the foundation has been focusing its contribution on training in improving the way resources are managed, and not only financial resources, but mainly pedagogical resources and educational institutions at the basic level are managed. We have a training programs that goes for heads of departments of education to school principals. Our school principals program have affected almost 2 million students. 2,000 principals were trained, and they are responsible for managing 2 million students. We're seeing good results after people enroll in the program. They are master programs, specifically designed, very practically oriented for school principals. We have also more recently started teacher training programs, believing that we need to complement what traditional educational schools, the way they are training teachers in our country. Unfortunately, a lot of the practical elements of how to teach a classroom, how to manage a classroom, how to evaluate a student, how to help students who have difficulty in learning, and also how to help the ones who move faster. This is very challenging, and we need to deal with all those issues if we want to progress in education in the country. And lastly, the newer area the foundation is investing is technology in the classroom. How technology can be of help to be able to help teachers and principals and students and their families to achieve the goal of improving the quality of education in the country. Not only the foundation has been doing this very concretely on the ground abroad inside public schools in some very difficult areas in the state of São Paulo and other states, but we're also very much committed to helping to develop policy, to helping to develop research in this area. Part of our new agreement with the center in Stanford means that we're going to implement in the next couple of years in Brazil a educational policy think tank helping to develop very concrete solutions and debates to foster innovation and implementation of solutions in the field of education in Brazil. But not only we believe that it is important to work on the ground and bottom up, but we believe that what's behind part of the scholarship program that compared to what was just presented here seems so small. But in the past years, in the past 10 years, different initiatives from the foundation and foundations sponsored by the foundation have brought over 700 students to do their master's or PhDs in the US. We're more and more asking of those students, who we call Lemann Fellows, to be very much committed. The major thing that we ask of them is their commitment to help solving a major social problem in Brazil, that they come back and do this, or they, maybe they need more years studying or having work experience abroad, but when they come back and when they are doing their work, wherever they are, they're very committed to supporting change in our country. And we have a network of those students, and we think this is a very important component of every program, really creating a network and having an opportunity of multiplying the efforts and the effects of not only the experience those students have when they are studying abroad in some of the universities here, but also that they are able to share their work experiences and share their dream to improve the quality of the country and find resources. If we look in the next 10 years, only in the Lemann Fellowship program, just one of those programs, we expect to have over 500 people going abroad and coming back to Brazil. And if this is a very small number in the general population of Brazil, this is not such a small number in terms of committed individuals with a very, very high-class education who have decided to dedicate a big part of their lives to changing the country. And I think if that is steered correctly, and if we can work together with other institutions and other networks and associate with other programs, that can help be the top-down initiative that help improving not only education but the development of the country. Again, we need to be very modest about what this contribution can make. We're a small foundation. We don't plan to solve all the problems. I'm just describing it because that's what we know best, and that's what I think I should be doing, just to share that there is another effort complementary to the more visible effort with international institutions that we saw here over the past days. I think basically to conclude that what we need really to think is exactly find what are the role of each different actor in the common effort to improve the quality of education in Brazil. And if foundations think they have, if we put the burden on foundations, or if foundations themselves put the burden or think they are responsible to find a solution and try to implement that, I think we're really going to the wrong direction. I think if we are able, as foundations and in general, if we can increase civil society's first awareness of the state of education in our country, although we know all these numbers, and here it seems obvious that education in Brazil is going through a difficult moment, even if going in the right direction. We look at this, but in general, parents are very happy with the education kids are getting in schools. In the city of São Paulo, 80% of parents are happy with the quality their kids' education is in school. And the reason is either because they had less access to education than their kids are getting, or simply because at least schools are there, or because it takes longer to see the effects of a bad education, whereas if you are shot or robbed, or if you have to go to an emergency room, and if that's not working, you feel immediately why these sectors are not working. So raising awareness of the need to change education and change fast, as we all said here, we're going the right direction, but we need to accelerate. If we need if we need people just to invest in new ideas and innovation, but not only innovation, sustained innovation, to have institutions in Brazilian civil society who are thinking about education, proposing solutions and testing solutions, and then partnering with government to help in another challenge that comes after you find good solutions, which is implementing in the scale that Brazil needs. And that's not going to be easy to any individual actor in civil society or in society as a whole. So we hope to bring some contribution to that, but most of all, we hope to be dialoguing, as we're doing here, with many other institutions, both academic and non-academic, governmental and non-governmental, to be part of this great network that can at least help maybe to transform the level and the results of our education in the next 20 to 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And then the last presenter for this session will be Joan Dassin Joan Dassin of the Ford Foundation.
Thank you all, and thank you for your patience. I know it is me now that stands between you and your cocktails, so I will try to be brief, but hopefully to the point. I want to thank Werner for his provocative comment about the role of the Ford Foundation in particular, but I'm also grateful to the former speaker, Dennis, who I think laid out the role of the Lemann Foundation in terms that we, representing the Ford Foundation, could probably sympathize with a great deal. And I do come to this presentation from the viewpoint of a private philanthropy. The role is not to replace government. It is, however, to act as a catalyst, to highlight issues that may be, for one reason or another, not at the forefront of the discourse in any given place, and then over a sustained period of time to be able to pilot some solutions that in an ideal world are then adopted by other actors at a larger scale. That said, the particular role of the Ford Foundation in Brazil, Tom knows this well, and I spent my time there as well, has been very much aligned with the question of social justice in the country, the question of racial and ethnic diversity, and the question of inequality. So what I want to tell you today about in brief terms is a very large-scale, long-term, relative to most private foundation investments, fellowship program that actually works globally. I want to give you some detail about how it actually operated in the Brazilian case, and then conclude with a few observations based on our experience in this program about some recommendations for U.S.-Brazil educational exchanges. The program that I direct and had a large hand in designing back in 1999-2000 is called the Ford Foundation International Fellowships Program, IFP for short. This is a very large-scale program, as I mentioned. It represents the largest single grant ever made by the Ford Foundation. The total investment is $340 million of grant funds. The earnings on that investment, since the grant was actually made up front to a small organization that I direct, probably represents a total investment with the earnings plowed back into the project of nearly $500 million. This is a fellowship program. It has supported scholarships for up to 3 years of postgraduate study for people in 22 countries, largely determined by the regions of the world where the Ford Foundation has field offices, and Brazil is one of 5 Latin American countries where the program has been active. From the very beginning, the goal was to target this entire exercise, a very traditional modality of a fellowship program. They've been around for at least 100 years. We went back to the Rhodes Scholarship to see how it was done early on. We didn't improve probably very much on that. But to take this very traditional modality and focus it to the degree possible on the question of unequal access to higher education, which, despite all of the expansion of higher education systems around the world, is still the dominant feature there, and particularly at the highest levels of postgraduate education. And if access and mobility is restricted at the postgraduate level, international mobility is even more restricted. And for those of you who follow the numbers, the Institute of International Education just published its most recent Open Doors survey. This deals mostly with bilateral exchanges with the US, but for all of the talk about the contribution of international education to the US economy, and it's not insignificant. The latest estimate is about $22 billion represented by international students in the United States. Nonetheless, that entire number of about 700,000 international students in the United States represents less than 3.5% of the entire student population in the US. So the international flow of students is still very, very limited. So that's our program. We have managed over 10 years to select over 4,300 fellows. It's not 72,000 per year, but for a privately supported program, it's very significant. And I once looked up the data, and I think that the Ford Foundation, this effort fell somewhere between France and Finland in terms of the actual students that it was able to support. The key point about this program and many of the ways in which it was innovative is that we, after some analysis, concluded that in today's day and age, probably aside from prior education and other kinds of opportunity, international competitiveness, the single largest barrier to international mobility, often even for people from Anglophone countries, is a knowledge of the English language. And therefore, particularly given the kinds of students from marginalized communities around the world that we wanted to reach, we began to think of English as a kind of exit benefit rather than an entrance requirement. And that led us to build a globalized system where, in fact, students could study anywhere in the world, including in their home country and home region. And as I said, we've now selected, our selections are winding down because even a 10-year, multi-million-dollar program by the Ford Foundation does have a time limit. But we have managed to place students in over 600 universities in nearly 50 countries. About a third have studied in the United States, a third have studied in the UK and Europe, and about a third have studied in their own countries and regions. I just wanted to say more generally, and then I want to spend my time on the Brazil case. Obviously, the question of marginality and how you define access to higher education and who has it and who doesn't have it, and of those who are excluded, who might be good candidates for highly competitive postgraduate programs, is a very complicated one. So because we recognize the complexity of that issue of looking deeper at the question of access and equity in higher education, we developed a very decentralized structure for implementing the program. So basically, the Ford Foundation created a spin-off organization that operates like a small foundation, and we, in turn, make grants to about 24 local organizations around the world that administer the program, including the recruitment and selection of candidates in their own countries. And the other side, and Dennis mentioned this when he was talking about the Lemann Fellows program, being from a member of a marginalized group was not a sufficient criterion. We also wanted to be able to benefit people who had a long and demonstrable record of engagement with problems in their home communities from a variety of fields, mostly social science fields, fewer people in the exact sciences, but obviously some in interdisciplinary areas such as development studies and environmental studies. And at the end of the day, we've had longitudinal evaluation of this program since 2003 by a Dutch organization. We have really outstanding academic performance, a 97% placement rate of these 4,000 plus fellows. That is, we do not require that they have a graduate admission before they apply, which is actually also a very important limiting factor for people who are outside the usual networks. So 97% of our students are placed in first-rate universities around the world, including 68 who've come here to Columbia. 98% of those fellows who continue on remained in the program. In other words, they completed their fellowships, and we have a 91% graduation rate of those people earning master's and doctoral degrees. So when, I don't have enough time to go into the backgrounds of these people, but when you see who they are, this is really an extraordinary set of results. And probably the last general result I wanted to share is that particularly for the African countries, the question of brain drain is still very formidable. It's obviously much less relevant in Brazil today. But we see 82% of our fellows return home, and almost everyone else, 90% of those remaining 18% are still studying for further degrees. So at the end of the day, they are returning home and remaining engaged in their communities. The Brazil program, very briefly, it was one of our largest of these 22 programs around the world, almost 350 fellows. Again, it's not your 72,000, it's not even the Lemann Foundation 700, but it's a significant number. Brazil was our largest program in Latin America, comparable to India, China, and Indonesia, which was actually our largest program. And because of this the whole question of our focus, the driving focus of this program being on marginalized and excluded groups, we were very interested in increasing the representation of non-whites in higher education in Brazil. Obviously, we talked about affirmative action several times here. It is as controversial in Brazil as it is in the United States, particularly race-based affirmative action issues. But what we were able to do, I think, is come up with a methodology. We actually developed a quantitative selection model that was based on household surveys that incorporated not only race, but region, father's education, mother's education, occupation, and several other factors. And by giving preferential weights to candidates who demonstrated all of those characteristics, including race and ethnicity, we were able to come up with a group of fellows, of this 350 fellows. By the way, there were almost 9,000 applications over this 10-year period. But the group of fellows could be declared themselves as self-identification. 95% are Afro-descendant or indigenous. And in fact, the very first indigenous person to ever get a PhD in Brazil, as far as we know, from Pernambuco, by the way, Maria das Dores, when she defended her dissertation at Campinas in linguistics, by the way, it was front page news in the Estado de São Paulo, is our fellow. 65%, about 2/3 of the Brazil fellows are from the northern, northeastern, or central west region of Brazil. So that was why I was asking that question about, while they have studied it at PUC São Paulo, at USP, at Campinas, at the state universities in São Paulo, at the Federal University in Rio, at several universities in Rio Grande do Sul, when they conclude their studies, they are going back to their home communities. So that's an interesting long-term effect. We follow a lot what the alumni are doing in Brazil and elsewhere, and I'll just share with you, we can go there in much more detail about these fellows, where they come from, what they studied. One salient fact about our Brazil program that totally distinguishes it from other cases elsewhere in the world is that the vast majority of the Brazilian fellows, although they had the opportunity to study anywhere in the world, we would have provided language training if they had wanted to study in a non-Portuguese environment, 86% of them remained in Brazil by choice. And this is an interesting fact about the intellectual culture, the academic culture, but it also says something that if you were in, as we were saying the other day, if you're an indigenous person and you live in San Gabriel de Cachoeira, we had fellows from there, going to São Paulo is already a very large, we called it our Programa Sanduíche Interno, you know. So there was a lot of internal mobility within Brazil. And we also had a sandwich program feature that was possible for all of our fellows, and the Brazilians took great advantage of that. And many of them went to Portugal. We have a nice nucleus at University of Texas at Austin and other places where there are linkages. So at the end of the day, what's very interesting about this small little model is that we were able to very effectively target a population from ethnic and racial minority, but also regional minority, people largely studying in the social sciences. And basically the profile of the Brazil fellows is that they're militants of one sort or another. They came up through the social movements in Brazil over the last 20 years, and they have also been able to be extraordinarily effective in the academic world, which now, as we're following their next step, even though some of them are older chronologically, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to them professionally. So what I can tell you is that almost 40% of these Brazilian graduates are now continuing their postgraduate studies for doctoral degrees with other sources of funding. So that indicates a terrific academic success. 3/4 of them are employed. And because of the particular selection focus, about 60% of them are employed in the education sector. And of those, most of them are university professors. They are increasingly passing through competitive concursos, public examinations, and they're occupying professional academic posts in regional universities in Brazil. This is very much the profile. But they are also running NGOs and working on public policy in a whole variety of areas. And some of our indigenous fellows have already attained quite a lot of national prominence. They're on the Conselho Nacional Indígena and so on. So I wanted, since 2 minutes has come up, I'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about our efforts to sustain this program, even as the Ford Foundation support is ending. In Brazil, actually, the Ford Foundation, the local Ford Foundation office, made a very nice grant for the group we work with. We work with the Fundação Carlos Chagas in São Paulo to institute our pre-academic training program, which we have developed to assist our fellows be admitted into graduate programs into 15 federal universities around Brazil. So that's a good sustainability solution to that. Let me just say a few words about international cooperation. I referred to these open door data. You'll see that Brazil still occupies, despite these wonderful new initiatives coming out of CAPES and other, and FAPESP and other Brazilian government entities, Brazil is still quite low. It's in 14th place among sending countries to the United States. It has sent just under 8,800 students. The comparison was made to China. 157,000 at any one time. This is not every year, but obviously the gap is still very large. And the Brazilian students in the United States account for about 1% of the total foreign students. So the good news from that, and the obverse is also true, that even though there has been more interest in among US students to go to Brazil and other what are called non-traditional destinations, basically that means anywhere out of the UK and Western Europe, the numbers there are still very low. And so I think the good news from this picture is that while the base is low, there's a great new interest. And I, as someone who's been watching this for many decades, I think it's fantastic that the Brazilian government and at the state level as well are looking for ways to cooperate. And obviously, we've been discussing how that will work out. But I guess I would want to put my pitch based on our experience over the last 10 years, not only in Brazil, but elsewhere in Latin America, where we've worked with indigenous students and other people from marginalized groups, is to the degree possible, since sponsorships are so rare. I mean, do you know that the US government support for sponsored international students in the United States amounts to less than 1% of the funding for international students. Most are self-financed. So we can't look to the U.S. government much, I think, is the moral of the story. And even private foundation support for this sort of international students coming to the United States is falling off. So I think that my own personal view of this is that the kinds of international collaborations that were discussed here that build on long-term faculty and student exchanges are really the only way to maintain some sort of continuity. And I would argue that on the basis of what we have done over the last 10 years, that those kinds of exchanges can also be looked upon as an excellent opportunity to address these larger structural questions of inequality and unequal access to higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And finally, as our commentator, we have Professor Philip Altbach, who is the director of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to take about 5 minutes and cover a series of broader points relating not only to this last session, but to the whole conference. Things which sort of occurred to me as we were talking. And again, as I said in my earlier intervention, please forgive my complete ignorance of Brazil. I hope I don't say anything too stupid. My first point is how to get more interest in the United States in Brazil. I think that's a very important element. If you want to be able to build up some interest among American universities in particular and the academic community in general, and maybe in the government, state and federal, in emerging Brazil. You have one thing going for you. You know, Brazil is a brick, and Brazil is, I would not say hot in the consciousness of the rest of the world, but it's warming up. China's very hot, as indicated by all the numbers of students and scholars who are here in the US and so on. So, how to do some good propaganda about increasing consciousness about Brazil. And I think that this combination of universities that's involved with Lemann dialogue can be very instrumental in that, simply by thinking about outreach, thinking about placing articles, short articles in newspapers, thinking about generally raising the consciousness about Brazil. And I would say also that the responsibility is on our American colleagues, but also on our Brazilian colleagues, who certainly can write well, all of you, in English, and who know the system and can be part of that discussion. Making sure in the higher education area that the Chronicle of Higher Education, which actually doesn't do a bad job of focusing from time to time on Brazil, inside higher education, the web-based publication, and other forums that university leaders look at, having some consciousness of Brazil in the, for example, the American Council on Education, which is the club of the presidents, as you all know, et cetera. So there's a role to be played, and I think some important work can be done. And in the short run and in the long run, it can help exchanges. It can help how to expand knowledge about and an appreciation of the importance of Brazil, its problems in higher education, and its very significant accomplishments. And of course, there are elements of the Brazil experience which are very instrumental to thinking about American higher education issues, especially about race and ethnicity questions. My second point, I think in Brazil, and this is slightly related to the first, there is a need for a kind of institutional thinking capacity about higher education. Now, there's plenty of thinking capacity about higher education in this room, No question about that. The level of the discussion has been very high. There is research out there. Institutions, governments are collecting lots of data and interestingly analyzing that data. But, this is my impression, there's no place in Brazil that's at it day by day, week by week, year by year, in building up a research capacity, writing materials, working on this sort of propaganda business, which I mentioned earlier on, and so on. I know my colleagues at Unicamp are thinking about it. Others should think about it too. There should be a place in Brazil where there is work on higher education in a systematic and continuing way. Not rocket science, but it's something that's that's important. My next point, which I mentioned before, by the way, these are not all related one to the other. They're kind of random observations. Chaos. I think, as I said before, and listening to all these really interesting reports for the last day or so has made me think it even more, that a key problem in Brazil is thinking about a system, thinking about a differentiated system of higher education in the public sector. How to have universities which are not research focused as a way of dealing with larger numbers, as a way of funding universities in the public sector that isn't so expensive as a research university, et cetera. And then in a similar way, thinking about how to integrate the private universities, the private sector, in this broader system. What I've called the private higher education for the public good. I don't know that anybody's thinking about that. And it often takes state intervention in terms of quality assurance, in terms of beating people on the head sometimes, to ensure that the privates, which are mostly either de facto anyway for profit, and that's been pointed out here, not all, but many, are forced to think that way, because often they won't think that way unless they're forced to. And my final point about how Brazil can, if it wants to place more students in the United States, and I think it should, not just for the Americans' sort of best interest, which it is in our best interest, but because I think our model of doctoral education, combining coursework with research, with, generally speaking, pretty good advisement from faculty members, is the best model out there in the world today. It's better than, in my view, the European research doctorate and sort of anything else that one can think of. I mean, no doubt there are better ways of doing doctorates, and there's a lot of discussion in this country, as some of you know, about reforming the doctoral experience. But it's not a bad system. And it would be too bad, and largely our fault, if there are fewer Brazilians coming here, because I think Brazil in the long run would benefit from it. So, how to do that? You might want to look at what the Saudis have done. That is, the Saudi government has in 4 or 5 different places in the United States Saudi educational missions that work on a day-to-day basis with universities, with state governments, with students, to inform them about what's happening in Saudi higher education, to make linkages, to sign institutional agreements, and so on. And that when the Saudis students come, and they are generally, I think, of a significantly lower accomplishment level than the average Brazilian who comes for doctoral study in this country, they do a lot of care and feeding of those students. Now, part of it is to keep the political lid on them and religious lid, that's another story. But the main point is that they provide support services, make sure they get their checks on time, and try to give them some intellectual sustenance from back home while they're here. That's an interesting model. It's not cheap, but it probably could be done less lavishly than the Saudis do it, and it would make a difference in, again, raising Brazil's image in the U.S. And also signing agreements and having people here who really know American higher education from Brazil, who are on the ground working. It could be that your educational attachés in some of the consulates could do that. Maybe they're already doing that. But it's a model that has worked for them over 40 years. And they place large numbers of students in U.S. In U.S. Universities. Thank you. That's enough. I have some more.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So we have a little bit of time for, as always, we have a little bit of time for questions or comments. If anyone would like to make a comment, question. Okay, Marilee, if you want to start.
A quick, it's a quick question for education specialists around the table and around the room. One of the things that I think is quite different in the United States from Brazil and many other countries is the whole admissions process, both to undergraduate education and to graduate education. And I wonder how much the Brazilian, the dynamic of Brazilian, of Brazil being able to send students to the United States, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, could be promoted by help to students back in Brazil around the whole admissions process. I'm reminded that in U.S. high schools there are large cadres of guidance counselors whose sole purpose in life is to help high school students through the admissions process for different levels of education. And if we need it for our students who are coming up through the U.S. system, perhaps that could be particularly helpful for Brazilian students coming up through the Brazilian system, whose understanding of admissions and what one has to do to get admitted may be quite different from the process here in the United States.
I think Phil is right in a way that it is largely an issue. I mean, there are two issues. One is the language issue, but that's pretty easy to overcome, I think. The upside, and I think it's mainly an issue of working on those relationships. I was really shocked by the small number of universities that you showed in the United States with whom you have collaborative agreements. Do you want a collaborative agreement with Stanford? We'll sign one with you. We just signed one with CONACYT. No problem. In Mexico, no problem. Stanford would be anxious to sign a collaborative agreement with CAPES, and we can arrange that. So I think it's a question, as Phil said, of really getting out there. I know that there's a sort of Europe orientation to Brazilian students, but I want to say on the good side, the Brazilian students that come to Stanford are really incredible. I mean, they're well prepared. Even the undergraduates, I mean, it's obviously quite a select group of people who are coming, but it's a large country, and so the select group that's coming are terrific. I mean, they're wonderful. The students that we brought in under the Lemann Fellowship they're the best students in the cohort, through and through. And The second thing is that Joan is too young to remember this, but there was a previous era in the 70s where we trained at Stanford under a Ford Foundation grant over 7 years. We trained 120 master's and doctoral students, about 20 of them from Brazil. That was when the program was being developed at Ford. They looked a little bit to us to do that. We had 2 Latin American presidents, a secretary of education of the state of Bahia, the first black woman in Brazil to become that level of, at that level politically in the country, and lots of university professors.
Thank you, Martin, but they were my best friends.
Okay. Okay. So the only disappointment is that under the new program, I've never seen a single student. But I think that Phil's advice.
Joan is a Stanford graduate in all full
Oh,
disclosure.
right. Right. Okay. Well, they were you. You were back there. Sorry, I didn't know. So, I think that it's a real shame, and it would greatly support the efforts that Lemann is doing if an organization like COPPAS, focusing on science, either in engineering, innovation, the kinds of thing that Paolo Blickstein's talking about, or even, as you pointed out, science and math education, STEM education, like the NSF is doing, trying to train people to go back to Brazil and really improve K to 12, I think it's 12, isn't it, or it's 11, science education, because that is a big barrier to forming more scientists and engineers in Brazil, as you mentioned.
I think we take the gentleman back.
Yeah.
Maybe you identify yourself?
Yes, Renato Pedrosa from Unicamp. I think I'll pick up from Phil. I think he's right that in Brazil, up to last year, we didn't have a group of people studying higher education consistently. In fact, there was a group in São Paulo, Simon Schwartzman and Eunice Durham in the late 70s, early 80s, and most of the higher education studies in Brazil came from that group and people formed by them that graduate from their program. But after Simon moved into some other areas and the group split, I think there's been a vacuum. We at Unicamp, you mentioned, we are trying to develop that group now. Last year we started. And I think I'd like to say that there are a few subjects now that are very hot in Brazil, and I think could be taken up by Lemann Foundation. They know about that because Dennis was at the meeting in Fortaleza, remember that? And about the assessment. In Brazil, one of the big issues is assessment of all levels of education. This has been mentioned here. And in higher education, we have one of the few comprehensive systems of involving exams and visits by committees to the institutions and evaluation of all aspects from undergraduate, graduation, and graduate school system. And but there is a real lack of expertise in the study of validity of those systems. This is the main issue, I think. And this has showed up in Fortaleza in August in the meeting of the Brazilian Association of Assessment, Education Assessment. And last week I was in Ministry of Education meeting that was debating ENADE and SINAIS, the system of assessment of higher education. I was on a table and I talked about the validity of the ENADE exam. And it's kind of surprising when you say, maybe this is not valid for assessing individual programs, but it's probably valid for assessing as an aggregate groups of institutions and types of institutions. And people say, why is that? I mean, but anybody that has studied the first page of the first book on validity knows that systems are valid for certain purposes, not valid in abstract. But this is not part of the culture. And there's a big issue there, because then the systems of assessment, they are challenged on their legitimacy. especially by the private sector. And the fact is, in certain aspects, they are right, even though they don't know why they are right, but they are right. That the system of assessment is not probably valid for a program that has only 10 people graduating, because it's obvious why it's. So, and it's only 3 years and cycle, so you don't have a large sample of people taking the exam and etc. So, but this is one issue, I think. It's from the beginning of basic education up to the graduate level, that the system of assessment, which has so much information, and that's true, that we have a lot of, and then we don't have people to deal with that information. So I think programs like Stanford has good expertise in assessment.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time,
okay.
so I want to take one more.
So I think that's a program, a type of program that in social science that would link education to assessment and to the system and to government issues and to policy issues, that I think the Lemann Foundation could really invest in bringing people to the U.S. to learn about that, because in the U.S. you have that expertise.
Thank you. And finally, Georgie, Georgie Lemann. And then we'll have let the presenters respond.
This may sound a bit of a provocation, but I think that we haven't discussed enough that famous word, which is a bit of a bad word, called cash, money. The fact is that the U.S. government is out. When we started organizing this conference, we were very much in the spirit of the Dilma-Obama meetings. Yes. And then the U.S. withdrew. And a number of other programs of international nature have been defined unilaterally by the U.S. I don't think there is much possibility of that changing, even if the current fiscal crisis is solved. I don't think you can expect much, or I would say even little, from philanthropy in the U.S. in this field. The role it played in the 20th century is not going to play in the 21st century. The general expectation in this country is that now development is taking place elsewhere, wealth is created elsewhere, and actually higher education and top-notch research are big export businesses in this country. And I think that, I may be exaggerating but that's the underlying message, and that has to inform Brazil or anybody else coming to deal with this country, including the universities, including the nonprofits. As you well know, the large American universities, mainly the private, but also the publics, sit on large endowments. Yet they are not showing much of an interest in using at least a minimum chunk of that environment to put money where their mouth is. They speak a lot about globalization, but they expect the Chinese or the Indians or the Brazilians to pay for that. This is not meant in terms only of criticism. You can say that, and a number of people have been saying that. But I think that sets up the context for negotiation. And I think that, if anything, on top of all the other proposals by Phil and the others that may serve to implement Brazil-led programs in the US, I think the overall spirit has to be to come as harder negotiators. Because Brazil is much stronger than what it was, and because the US, everybody, including the elite universities, only hear messages when there is money behind. And I think that the fact that a Brazilian foundation is sponsoring us here is not only something to be very grateful, but it is very symbolic, it is very important. I not only appreciate that, but Brazil has to use that. In fact, we interested in Brazil have to use that as a sign to say other people, relevant people in our boards of trustees, in our high-level management positions in the universities, that not only these people have something to offer, they're coming with the money, but they have some conditions. So you have to kind of come from perspective of a buyer's market rather than the seller's.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
I'd like to give a couple minutes for our presenters to respond, and Georgie is anxious to talk, so I'd like you to talk.
Okay?
Right?
long as
Yes,
the
the questions were quite.
Well, I will start with the last one. I'm very sorry. We are not asking for any philanthropy. Nothing. We pay everything. Everything. From the highest level, at Harvard, Stanford, MIT, wherever, Columbia, we pay for that. We are not asking for philanthropy. We are also using the requirements that your university is offering or asking for. We are using the IIE and Las Pau, so we're not very innocent about that. So I'm very sorry about that. I didn't come here to ask for philanthropy. Concerning other paradox, you said that you have a very good Brazilian student. That's true for every place we send them. Why that? What's the paradox? We have a very weak basic education, especially in science and mathematics and science. Why you have been doing so well in the graduate program, being 13 in the world in science production, being so late, and you're a new player on that. Yes, 50 years ago, we had nothing. Why we do that? Because we have we use our creativity. Then he said that there is no good example. That's wrong. Brazil has one of the most important systems for training scientists. We start at the first year in the undergraduate, asking them to come to the labs or to covers our fields for training how to do science. But the first week at any undergraduate program, it covers the whole country. With fellowships for that, 80,000 undergraduate students are being trained this way. This will feed our master program. That's why we do not send master's students outside anymore, since 20 years ago. Because after the United States, the best master program in the world is ours. Not in China, not in European countries. They do not have as much experience in masters. We do have, learned from the United States. So we took the best students to do that. They are invited. We offer them the fellowship if they really respond to what each research wants them to do. And they start to doing that for the 4 years undergraduate, or 5 years, or 6 years for medical students. So that's why you send outside only the best ones. But even so, we accept our requirements of our partner university in the world. And we have money for that. We do have $2 billion for these 75,000. Mostly to the United States, because the European country, except for United Kingdom, they do not charge anything for us, because we have a lot of formal agreements. That's what I was trying to say. That is very much difference with the United States. So what's this Brazilian being, let's say, being advertising the importance of the U.S., as you mentioned? Yes, American embassy is doing a lot of work in Brazil for this proposal. And as a matter of fact, December 17 will be the visa day for Brazilian student comes to the United States. Or whole country. That's a decision of the embassy, the American embassy. So they're doing a lot. But you cannot, why don't you put the other way around? Why not saying that Brazil is not well known here? Up to some years ago, many Americans, they confuse Buenos Aires for Rio de Janeiro. They did not know which was the capital of the country at that time. Imagine Brasilia now. So we need the other way. We need both ways, I would say. And some American universities, I would say, maybe not the best ones, they are buying Brazilian higher education institutions. Are they going to repeat there what you have as a very bad system? And this started with Mr. Cardoso. Before that, there was not that amount of bad university in Brazil and the higher education system. This was, they stimulate a lot this private institution, which has nothing to do with good teaching. We can accept the idea that not all universities may have a good, let's say, output in science. We can accept that. But why it's so bad? Why they decide that to be bad? As Professor Brito said, when they contract some let's say, a doctor, he says that he doesn't have that title because otherwise they have to pay more. So they decide to be bad. So it's very difficult to correct that. Besides, they have a very good group of parliamentarians that defend them in the Congress. So you have to cope with all this amount of problem. But we are doing the best. We are doing the best to escape this. Concerning the systematic studies about higher education in Brazil, there is some people doing that. Many of them, some of them, not all, but some of them very biased. Bias a lot concerning the new advance. So whether people trying to say that it's a difference between Fernando Henrique Cardoso and the Lulas, I don't think there is reason for that. Lula did a very good job in Brazil. That's no doubt. The whole world recognizes that. We still have a lot of inequalities to be concerned about. So that will be difficult to integrate the private, as you ask. How can you do that? We have to improve our CNIs. Someone mentioned that that's the system that for evaluating the undergraduate. CAPES is doing that since 1976 with very good results. As a matter of fact, introduced by the fellow, the Brazilian fellow, Claudio Moura Castro. So 76 is the only country which does that. The other day, there was an article at Science here say that every American knows what is the best basketball team from the university in this country. But few people know which is the best graduate course in chemistry because it's confused. It's not regular. This is in science. That's not my words. So we know that in Brazil. We do that every third year. And we follow up then every year. So we have been doing this very well. But this cannot be applied for the undergraduate yet. It cannot be applied for the private institutions. We hope that you can escape this program. Finally, we know that the PhD programs in the United States are the best. We know that. That's why we insisted to start with the new Science Without Borders by the United States. That's why our first public call was for American universities, because we had only 25% of our students are here today. And there was 80,000 applicants. And most of them already passed the TOEFL, the first requirements, basically. And last week, we decided together with IIE which ones we're going to send first. That's why the embassy is making this visa day for supporting this first cohort of students.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. If Joan or Denise, if you guys want to make a remark. Very briefly. No? Denise? No? Okay.
Can I just put an information? Is it possible? Very brief.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I think that you mentioned that there is a lack in Brazil of thinking capacity on higher education. And I would not agree with that because, first of all, Brazil changed a lot for the last 20 years and 15 years. There is not only at the Ministry of Education, the INEP, that provides a lot of data, but some research groups within universities. And also, there is, for instance, in the area of science, technology, and education is included the Center of Strategic Studies and Management that was responsible, for instance, for these big studies about the PhD in Brazil, permanently does that. You can visit the website. There is a lot of publication. The one point is that a lot of things in Brazil are in Portuguese. This is a restriction. We have considered by the National Science Foundation leader in the program, a nice program called Science for Science Policy. She mentioned, and also in Nature, also in Science, the Brazilian system or the platform for monitoring who is who in science and technology, what kind of job is being doing, and also to have access to all information about all research in Brazil is just a portal in Brazil. It's a portal that's based in curriculum lattice. It is considered the best one within the scientometrics program that is being discussed not only in the United States but also in Europe. So I think that there is a language barriers to understand. And for those who study Brazil, to take a look on the very new things that taking place in the country. But unfortunately, they are written in Portuguese, the majority of the material. So many people don't have access and don't know that they exist. I recommend to make a visit on those new institutions, so you're going to have some surprises.
Thank you. I'm going to toss this over to Tom now. So we're in this session.
I'm going to thank you and the speakers
okay.
first. But what I promised we would do is, I think, just reflect in public. It's like, I feel like one of those evangelists in a big stadium, you know, and asking people to come on down. And I don't want to take on that, but I do think I wanted to call on my colleagues and my co-hosts, Marilee Grindel and Mary Paula, who's also here, but of course also involving Werner, the other co-conspirators here, Werner, Fran Hagopian, Joe Love, and Jorge Lemann, my good friend and real intellectual author of much of our program today, just to think about what we do next. I know the easiest thing is to say, oh, we'll be in touch, we'll email you, we'll call, but I just thought we might spend this next few minutes kind of in an open dialogue among ourselves as to, and I didn't mean to exclude Paulo Blickstein either. Paulo Blickstein is part of that group too, of where we go from here. I know it's easier, as I say, to do that among ourselves and in the quiet of a conference call or via email, but what are sort of our next steps? And I would simply start maybe to get us in the spirit and then turn it over to you, Marilee, then to you, Mary Paula, and then to you, Paulo. And the answer could be, get back to you on that. Not sure. Got to talk to my colleagues. But my first recommendation, simple as it is that the 4 universities here that have come together, and I think in the fullest spirit of the Lemann Foundation, you know, putting good people together and good things will happen. My first recommendation is to the 4 of us, the University of Illinois, the Harvard University, Columbia University, and Stanford University, insofar as our Brazilian centers are concerned, that we lock arms and continue to talk and to find concrete, specific ways to collaborate. So it's a very simple observation. I've got some details that follow it, but just to kind of get us in the spirit of these wrap-up comments, I would propose that, and I appreciate everybody else sitting in while we engage in some intramural discussion. But that would be my first proposal, and I want to turn it over in that spirit. Marilee, without limiting you in any way, what your reaction would be.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, everyone who has been here and certainly helped enlighten me about issues that have to do with higher education and in Brazil and the options and opportunities that we have for moving forward together in terms of thinking how U.S. institutions and Brazilian institutions can be more effectively linked and more engaged with each other. We met last, I believe it was in March. We put together a short document saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z. X was a conference that would rotate among our institutions. Y was exchanging Lemann Fellows and visiting scholars on a regular basis. Z was linking up our websites and things like that. I think there was also an ABC. But today has been the X. Today and yesterday has been the X, the very first step in a collaboration among our 4 institutions. I think it's been very successful. I should at this point pass it over to Fran, since if there are follow-up activities, she would feel the burden rather than I. But you know, from my perspective, it certainly seems that this is something we ought to continue. We ought to think about what's the next topic. I was thinking there are areas in education, for example, that we could continue drilling down in educational issues, or we could move on to another topic. But Fran, if you've got a couple of sentences that you have my commission, you have my permission to commit us.
Thanks. I actually want to pass and let other people speak first, and then I want the last word here.
Oh, you do?
I've got an agenda.
Then being it for the Harvard, we'll go to Illinois, and then we'll go to Stanford.
I'd like to pass to Paulo, because I think you might have wanted to talk before.
Go ahead, Paulo.
I've talked a lot, so.
Well, I mean, I just want to make some brief comments. I think the idea of having a conference is a great idea. It's a good organizing principle for people to have something to look forward to and to prepare their work and organize how they're going to present and interact with other people. But you know, you have already thought of that, so it's no news. And I think in general, sometimes one of the things we've been discussing about education is that sometimes not in a kind of imperialistic way, but sometimes it takes someone from the outside to direct your attention to problems that sometimes where you're inside, you can't really distinguish priorities and what you do. So I think this group might have this interesting advisory role to institutions in Brazil, not to say what you do, but to say, look, we've been watching what you've been doing and it's great stuff, but you should maybe focus on this, because from here we look at many other countries, many other things. This might be an interesting direction. So I think these conferences could, do that in a way. We could comment on other countries. We could, comment on case studies and help people in Brazil to know what's going on around the world. So I think that's a good principle, and it's always great to come to New York, but rotating is not a bad idea.
Nothing wrong with California. Werner Beer.
First of all, I hope certainly that the dialogue will be an annual affair, and since unfortunately it falls upon Illinois to host the next Brazza conference, which is next year.
It's Brazil Studies.
It seems to me that Harvard would be the natural candidate for the next one. But besides education, there are a number of other topics. One topic that I'm personally interested in, and certainly will organize a separate conference, but it deserves maybe 2 or 3 conferences, and this is the big problem of infrastructure. Brazil is way behind in infrastructure. How are you going to finance infrastructure? How are you going to, what's the role of the private sector? What's the role of the public sector? And this becomes even more relevant when you consider the approach of the World Cup and then the Olympics, which will require a huge amount of infrastructure investment. And Brazil, up to now, has really not been able to cope with it effectively. You have the PAC, which has a lot of infrastructure projects, but they're way behind. We don't know why. What's institutionally keep the government from carrying through programs they already decided upon? They're fascinating topics that are of interest to economists, to sociologists, psychologists, and political scientists. So that's one suggestion I have.
Thank you very much, Werner. Jason, I didn't mean to, I want to include you too, and fellow conspirator here.
That's quite all right. Actually, there's two comments. There's just I think that Warner's suggestion was excellent. I was saying to Mary Lee that urban development issues or mega city issues, it's similar to infrastructure issues. There's a lot of overlap there, and we've certainly seen a lot of interest in that broader, slightly broader area. And then just a reflection in terms of the hearing comments about what is of value to Brazil and what is of value to the institutions in the U.S. And I think that that's absolutely the right way to look at things. If you don't have answers for that on both sides, it doesn't make much sense. And one area that we've seen a lot of growth in and a lot of mutual demand for is language study and getting people together. And one way that seems relatively inexpensive to do and where there's a lot of demand at Stanford, Harvard, Illinois, Columbia, and everywhere else in the U.S. is for young undergraduates here to get abroad and have experiences, which is quite complementary. And the one skill that they definitely do have is the English language and can help on the Brazil side. So it's not an expensive proposition, particularly if they pay for their plane tickets to get to Brazil. And if I were Brazilian, and I'm sort of have half my family that is, I would think that's a very good investment. So it's not to do with the conference, but just a general, what's a cheap way to help address the bottleneck? And that may be one.
And recognize Jorge and then Martin Carnoy. Jorge, you said your piece. Yes. Thank you again for everything you've done, Jorge, to make this a success. Martin, you have the final.
I wanted just to be sure I understood the objective of any of these conferences. One question, the other question is, given the objective, maybe the conference shouldn't be in the United States, but it should be.
That's an excellent idea.
Yeah, and I mean, I think best, I would like to see that four institutions, if they're going to have conferences about anything, figure out what the objectives of the conference are.
Very, very, very good. And we've actually, Mauricio Hans, who sends his apologies, had to leave to catch his airplane. He says we're going to get an invitation from Eduardo Campos, the governor of Pernambuco, to meet. We don't have necessarily the objective sketched out, but we have the place to do it. We have an offer already. And Mary.
Just kind of following up with Martin, and something that comes out of Illinois tradition, thinking about some intellectual product to have out of these type of meetings. So maybe preparing papers that we would want to publish in some forum. And going in that, just a suggestion to think about going in that direction.
Yes, thank you.
I think we're talking about a kind of an outreach direction here too, having this in Brazil. So,
Fran will have the last word.
Okay.
Fran will have the last word this evening, but before I do give it to you, Fran, thanks again to someone else. Was it? Oh, Dennis. Dennis, go ahead, and then Fran and I will wrap up.
No, just a suggestion, although I don't come from any of the four universities.
You have a certificate from Columbia.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So as a Columbian. So no, I just think that it might make sense, considering that we have several fellows, students in each of those universities, that depending on the topic, at least the students who are researching or studying things on this topic, even if they have graduated already, or if they're still on their programs, I think they would benefit a lot to be here and meet the professors and the students from the other universities. So it might make sense to, even if just as open them as an invitation, but I think some of them could have interesting things to present as well.
Excellent. I'm just going to be very quick, I promise, Fran, and then over to you. But my students remind me of this Gandhi's phrase, be the change you want to be. Some of these objectives in offering the assistance of our four universities. I turn to you, Jorge, because some of the other Brazilians have had to leave, but to the extent we can be helpful to you and your objectives, the four of us working together, we want you to know that we're there to the President Advisory Function, or in whatever way support might be needed. I want you to know that, and I think I speak for the others in the group. I know I speak for the others in the group, and I say thank you very much to the Fundação Lemann, in person here of Denise Misne, and to Jorge Paulo Lemann and members of his family who've been accompanying us. Our heartfelt gratitude for not only the resources that make it possible to be here, but the inspiration and the commitment that make it worth going beyond our conference and finding new ways to collaborate. Thanks to my colleagues at Esteban Andrade, especially, as I say, he worried about each and every one of you, and he's still worried that we're going to get over time. We'll finish on time and get to the cocktail party, which he's organized for us on room 802 in the SIPA building. To Gabriela Rocha, I don't know if she's still in the room. There she is. Thank you very, very much for all your assistance, for the photos, which we'll share with you on the website, and to many other students, unfortunately anonymous here, but students who've helped us put this together and made it possible. That's it for me, and Fran, you have the final word.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have asked for the penultimate word. I feel badly after that, but to sort of feel like that would have been a nice close. I guess I have to, I know we have to get out of the room. I want to say a few substantive things, and then the reason I wanted the last word. Substantively, I think we've got two issues here in the next steps. One is what we do with the education dialogue we just had, and what we do with our consortium in the next steps. And the dialogue, I was thinking along with Mary about products. We wanted to lower the bar from doing edited volumes, or else that's all we would do. But I don't see any reason why we can't have a next draft of Claudia Jamora Castro's paper, of Mauricio Hans's keynote address, put something together in a working paper series that would just be very easy just to put in the web of the product of the first Lemann dialogue, and I think we can and should do that. Oh, great. So great. So we can work that out. Secondly, on the consortium, one of the goals of the dialogue was to have a dialogue about a contemporary public policy issue facing Brazil, to bring a distinguished Brazilian to set the agenda in a keynote address, which Mauricio Hans was that. And we also had several distinguished visitors from the Brazilian government. And we did have the aspiration of doing a version of this in Brazil, but that also requires Jason's constraint, faculty time, as well as funding to restage such a dialogue in Brazil. But this is certainly something that was part of our deliberations. We also talked about inviting fellows and sharing them, and we will be doing that. That is in process to happen next semester. We'll be inviting visiting fellows from Columbia and Illinois to come to Harvard, and we'll be sending our folks on the road. So we are very, very happy to deepen these relationships. Merrily, I will commit myself to doing the next Lemann Dialogue. We'll see you all for the second Lemann Dialogue next fall in Cambridge. Fall in New England is beautiful. You will enjoy that. And so the very last thing, and the reason I wanted the last word, is that it's been wonderful here to be thanked by every speaker for the invitation, for being part of this event. And I want to take this moment to thank Jorge Balan for helping Tom, and Tom Trebat for shouldering the burden of this dialogue, for pulling it off beautifully. And all he got from us was some moral support, some emails that said, "Go Tom, we agree." And so this could not have happened without your vision, your dedication, your hard work. And everyone in this room owes you a tremendous debt of applause. No, but really.